Welcome to Out of My Mouth, the program where raw thoughts meet unfiltered conversations.
Join us as we dive into the depths of human experience, where we share stories, perspectives, and insights that just might challenge the status quo.
Get ready to laugh, cry, and ponder the world around you like never before. This is Out of My Mouth.
The views and opinions of our guest and hosts do not necessarily reflect those of New Thought Media Network, or any organization we may be affiliated with. Here at New Thought Media Network, we welcome freedom of speech and courageous conversations. There are many topics that can be difficult to navigate. Challenging the status quo and engaging in lively debate is important to expanding our understanding of one another, and life in general. Creating a peaceful world doesn't happen because no one disagrees, it happens from a willingness to understanding one another. In our programming, we strive to expand consciousness and assist people in creating remarkable lives. Your comments are welcome at info@ntmedia.org.
Good afternoon and welcome to Out of My Mouth. I'm Barbara Jean.
And I'm Marg.
And Cheryl's
in the black.
She's trying to get in.
I'm frozen.
We can hear you, Cheryl.
She's frozen because it's cold here in Toronto, in Ontario.
Oh, okay. There you go. I was frozen.
You're back.
Yeah, it looks like I have a slight internet issue today.
Okay.
So, hi everyone. I am Cheryl.
Hi, Cheryl.
Glad you're
Before we get started, I'd like to do the land acknowledgement. In the spirit of reconciliation and peace, we are grateful for the opportunity to meet on these sacred lands. We thank the generations of people who have taken care of this land for thousands of years. We recognize our oneness. We realize our history. We are one. We choose to create a new reality. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Yes, and we have been so looking forward to having Reverend Ogun Holder with us today to have a conversation about decolonizing New Thought. That being said, he seems to be missing in action. So, we have emailed him. We know that he's traveling, or we think that he's traveling, and we are surmising that he might have be mixed up with the time zones and the time difference. So I'm just going to go ahead and just give you an understanding of what that means. Decolonizing New Thought. It's a rich. Is he here? No? Oh, there we go. So decolonizing New Thought is a rich and timely topic that invites us to examine the origins, teachings, and practices of the New Thought movement through a lens of equity, inclusion, and cultural awareness, which New Thought has not always been good at because of the history of where we in the North Americas as white settlers come from. So
well, it's not just New Thought, it's our entire culture.
You're right, our entire culture. And today we're focusing on this, and this involves reflecting on how New Thought teachings can more fully embrace and honor diverse cultures, perspectives, history, and wisdom traditions.
Yeah.
So what do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting topic, and it's one that I've been part of an organization that's working on doing it within our organization. And it's interesting kind of the pushback we're getting as we go into diversity and equity and inclusiveness, that our organization, the one I'm speaking about, is the Toronto People with AIDS Foundation. And because of the immigration that's happened recently, the group of people, the white members of our community, are feeling a little bit left out because they set up a program that, worked however it worked. And that doesn't work anymore because it leaves out the majority of the population, and it's not effective. So we're looking at doing it there. And it's not really an easy task, because what we tend to do is we focus our attention on the marginalized communities, the marginalized people, and we forget that in doing that, we might marginalize someone who is not accustomed to it.
Right.
So what's interesting is, for us, we're trying to find a way to balance the equation so it is equitable for all. And it really is a big conversation, and it's really an important one. And I don't think there's any easy answers to it, but New Thought, for sure, like everything was built on that, even the Constitution of the United States, it's basically for the white male population and the English-speaking Christian elite is kind of how it was created. And so we're sort of pushing back on that now to create something different.
Yeah, I hear you. And I think part of our learning experience is recognizing that we don't know what we don't know.
Exactly.
Right. And so being willing to be curious and open to hearing, others' experiences and opinions and thoughts about this, and how it's evolved.
Cheryl, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're from South Africa. Do you have a perspective that you have been part of or witnessed to that you're looking at, you're smiling and
well, finish your sentence and then I'll
no, I just wondered if you had a perspective, or you've probably been witness to both sides.
Yeah, I think that it's when you start talking about different countries, it's much bigger than just talking about race. And what I mean is, I think culture comes into that in a big way. I think culture plays more of a role than race.
Race is a fabrication, right?
Exactly.
It isn't real.
Yeah.
So I believe it is culture and religion. That's the
culture and religion. Not to say that the Europeans didn't come and initiate racism in South Africa. And we've got like 11 official languages, which shows that those are just acknowledging 11 tribes. And how many more tribes are there? And each tribe has their own culture, their own belief system, right? So that's where I say it's a little bit more complex than that, but not denying that racism was a big thing. And I think that, and still is. And sometimes, not sometimes, I can tell you many feel that now it's reverse racism because white people are being punished by the government. That's what it feels like anyway, because of the wrongs that were done and because of how they're paying back to their comrades, basically. So it's so complicated. I think when we talk about North America, we not only talking about race, but we're talking about a culture where everybody has grown up in the same environment, right? Doesn't matter what color. And so I think that's, and again, I could be speaking out of turn. Somebody might argue with me, and I acknowledge that. But for me, it's more about acknowledging that we live in the same country. A lot of different races were born in the same country, but have a different experience.
Well, that's, yeah, very, very true. Because, even one of the things I've noticed often is that somebody can be born here, but if it's a person of color, or, someone who is maybe their grandparents are from India or something, that there's the assumption that they're Indian, from India, rather than a Canadian Indian born here. And so what happens sometimes is white people will ask, oh, so where did you originate from? And, where are you from? And they'll say, well, from Chicago, or from Alberta, or from wherever. And I thought you were from India. Like, there's assumptions because of the colonialism, where it's really, the colonial system is white, male, Christian English is kind of the basis of our colonial system here in North America. And we're really seeing that huge in the US at the moment, where that's a real push. And I think there has to be a shift where we find a way to peaceably be together, having conversations where we can agree to disagree, where we can be curious about each other's culture, curious about, our family rituals and things like that, and start to create a bridge that brings us together. And I think that's what the work is about. The decolonizing work is making it equitable to everyone, not equal, equitable.
Exactly. Yeah. So
when you said about getting curious, Barbara, I'm often curious. I'm so interested in hearing about people's practices, their culture, what they believe in, whatever. And I'm often afraid to ask the question, because what if I say the wrong thing? What if I ask the wrong question? And I'm seriously wanting to know and to learn. And so there's that barrier for me.
And I think that's probably true for a lot of people, that we're a little afraid of saying the wrong thing. And so we don't say anything, or we don't connect. My daughter was visiting 2 years ago, and she was at the park with her grandson. And there was a woman with her children. And so she started chatting her up and stuff. And the woman was really surprised that she even talked to her, because she was in a full hijab. And because of that covering, many people will not even make the attempt to just have, I mean, I think what we have to do is sit back and remove all of the labels, where we can sit back and go, okay, here's another human being. Let's have a conversation. Let's just talk. And if I don't understand the culture, I can go to the library and get a lot of information there, which will help to break the ice. But I think if we come into conversations going, we are human beings. We are equally taking up space on this planet. We all belong to be here. And, hi, how are you today? And, oh, look at your children. Aren't they wonderful? Or I think there's room for conversation that then opens doors, so the conversation can go deeper. And when we don't understand something, to ask questions. And if we step in it, which we probably will, when we step in it, then to sit back and go, wow, thank you. Thank you for letting me know, because now I can do better. Instead of defending our position, if we just say thank you, that can be really, really helpful as well. But we need to educate ourselves. I think it's important that we not expect other people to educate us on their experiences. Once we have a bit of information, then we can go to them and maybe get them to reveal more of their story, which is important. We have to see each other as people, all from the same source.
Yeah. And I think, I was in a group on Thursday last week, and we had a woman of color in there, and she is a beloved member of this group that we meets weekly. And she shared how, I think especially after the election, it's come up for her about what it means for their population, for their,
Yeah.
because, right, they are, what's the word, demarcated in a way in the States, right? I remember the red line, seeing a video about how it was intentional to separate blacks from whites and have certain neighborhoods be black and make it harder for them to get loans and finance and all kinds of things. Yeah. So, but this was intentionally engineered,
Well, of
basically.
course it has, because
Yeah.
it goes back to the colonial model: white,
Right.
Christian, English, and male, because
Exactly.
women are not considered people either.
Exactly.
So it really, it does go back to the beginning. Somebody was listening to a white man complain about the system, and she just looked at them and said, "Well, you created it." I don't know who said that, but I thought, yeah, you created the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the system doesn't work because
Yeah.
white men are not the majority of the population,
No.
not by
And
any
that's,
stretch of imagination.
well, this is it. And, but there is something going on in in the States. Like, I've been reading different things about even how many more blacks voted for Trump this time compared to last time, and why is that? They're feeling disenfranchised somehow. And yet there's, what's happened is a sort of misogynist, racist is now going to be in power. So it's hard to fathom. But I want to get back to that point, though. What she was saying is that for her, at her age, she started recognizing that she perhaps should be spending more time with groups of people like her, because they had more to share, to understand each other, where they're at right now, what they're experiencing, what they're going through. And really, this group cannot really relate, right?
No.
We can sympathize, empathize, we can love and be there for people, but we cannot in any way relate to the experience and the feelings that they are having right now.
Exactly. And have had all along. Like, they got a little bit of a reprieve, I think, under Obama, but it's like, it's gone right back. And I think when I look at the US, when you talk about black men voting for Trump, again, it comes back to, if you take a look at some of the countries around the world, women are truly second-class citizens. It was a woman running.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to choose a man over a woman.
Yeah.
Like, again, it comes back to that misogynist attitude. And, the colonial system is one set up basically for white men. Hi, Patty. Glad you're here. So I think, we're going to be peeling back the levels of this, like, for decades, trying to figure out how to unravel it. But when it comes I was shocked that he won the election, completely shocked and blown away, because it's like, how did that happen? But then in, sort of reflecting on it after the fact, it's, when you look at what the Americans believe, when you look at women's rights being ripped away left, right, and center all over the country, that speaks very loudly to why a woman was not elected. And then add
a woman of color.
And then add that she was a woman of color.
Exactly.
So it's like the other thing to consider, because we're in New Thought and we truly believe in the power of our words. If you think about the last 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, however long, what was the focus on every news station, every comedian, every newspaper? Trump, 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 Trump. That is the focus. And whatever we focus on grows and expands. That's what that's what ends up becoming the that happens because it's such a deep, strong focus. So
Yeah.
I think there was a lot of things that brought this about.
Yeah.
But I think looking at the whole colonial model, which was, you know, the colonists came in and they destroyed the indigenous culture and took over.
Yeah.
And that hasn't changed.
No.
It's
Well, and what's so interesting for me when I think about New Thought and spirituality is how back in the day, we thought we were so spiritual, and yet, and I'll speak for Unity. We know that in Unity history, there was a time that Black students could not stay at Unity Village, but all the white students were required to, right? Yeah. And so these kinds of things. So calling ourselves spiritual and then not recognizing the kind of actions that we would think or do or take.
Patty's.
Yeah, I'm reading Patty's question. I've just been reading about the early prehistoric people in Minnesota. So 15,000 years ago. So decolonizing must include prehistory, no? Yeah, and Patty, I acknowledge that I know nothing about that. What we're talking about today is decolonizing New Thought, which is a movement. And perhaps one of my other my co-facilitators could speak more clearly to that, because that's not my area of expertise.
Mine either, but I think there was a time when women were the predominant ruler, and I'd love to see us go back to that. And the reason I say that is I think women, and I'm not speaking of all women, but I think women in our nature are more, or women identify, right? It's either way, that we have a more inclusive nature overall, where we will include other people or be willing to learn about other cultures, things like that. I think that's been something that's, maybe by going back to that, there might be less war or whatever, but we're talking about decades to make the changes that need to be made. And the work that we're doing at PWA in trying to decolonize is one of the things is our governance, where we're, having a smaller board of directors so that the information that fuels this organization comes from the people who use it, the ones who know what they require. And I think that's the big thing, is how do we take government out of our lives, not to stop building roads or, things like that, or keeping us safe, whatever they're doing, but to get it to the point where they're not deciding what's best for us. And I think even in New Thought, when you take a look at the organizations, the way they're constructed, Unity, CSL, UFBL, all of them operate from their boards, setting the standards, the rules, the regulations. Who's talking to the people below and actually using what they receive to change some of those rules and regulations? It's not happening.
No,
not from my experience.
If I was new to this conversation and I saw New Thought, what do you mean by New Thought?
New Thought, age-old wisdom. The teachings of CSL, Unity, UFBL, Divine Science, Christian Science, all of them have come out of a movement that teaches about the quality of our thinking to create our lives. And so instead of calling ourselves Christian, although some consider themselves Christian, New Thought is open to all religion, all people, whether you're Christian or Buddhist or whatever. You could find information here that would be uplifting and rewarding, because there's not dogma and doctrine that has to be followed in the same way as, say, Christianity or any of the other religions. So that's how I would sort of describe it. I had an article, I don't know if I can find it quickly. If I can, I'll share it, because it's something that Ernest Holmes wrote when he had first founded the New Thought movement from our perspective of CSL, and how he spoke about what this is. It's a philosophy, it's a way of life. And so that's the difference. Although the government considers us a religion, that's more of a government, thing that, works or doesn't work. I don't know if it's the best, but that's how we're seen by the government, is as a religious entity. But the truth is, we don't have the dogma and doctrine that most religions have. And as such, we are set apart a little bit different as a result. So, but I'll see if I can find that document quickly as the two of you keep conversing.
Thank you. So it sounds like New Thought hopes to be, intention is to be broader and perhaps take responsibility for the outcome of our thoughts, as opposed to having it being in the hands of somebody else.
Yeah, correct, Mark. And based on the idea that the power of our thoughts can help us live better lives.
Yeah,
sure. So I was just looking at Ogun's article, because he wrote an article called Decolonization is a Spiritual Practice, for the Science of Mind magazine, I believe. And he says, thoughts on the uncomfortable and challenging work that spiritual communities and seekers resist. What would you say to that?
I think there's a great level of resistance. Yeah, go ahead, Mark.
I was just going to say, I think human beings tend to resist something that is uncomfortable. I think it's in our nature, and I hope there are more conversations that, like, my favorite thing to do is poke the bear, so that we're having conversations that are uncomfortable.
And sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
People don't like change. They like what they know, right? I mean, that is, like Mark says, human nature, to be sometimes comfortable in our discomfort and or what's familiar to us, and not necessarily willing to go into something different because they don't understand it or don't know it. But once they understand it, then all of a sudden it doesn't feel like a big stretch or a big change. But I think it is kind of our nature to resist change. Can I share with you what Ernest Holmes said this teaching is?
Please.
Yeah, he said that the mission is primarily a place of learning, and the sole purpose of enlightenment on spiritual principles and its application to the greatest of all arts, that of life itself. And for anyone who is interested in a scientifically deduced course of mental training, undivorced from the highest concept of truth, so the idea of spirit, for those who desire honesty, intelligence, freedom from any and all sense of mystery, and above all, practicality in the understanding of oneness, this has been founded. So that sort of says it for me, that it's inclusive of everyone, but does have that element of faith, right? We do believe in God or spirit, a universe, whatever you want to call it, the energy there. But at the same time, what we are is a learning organization. Our task is to assist humanity in evolving into its greatest potential. And that comes as we work together, not as we separate. And what we're seeing in the United States at the moment is a great deal of separation. When COVID started, we saw a great deal of separation because of vaccines and non-vaccinators. And so we're creating these levels of division. And I think the only way we move forward successfully in all of our encounters is to stop dividing and start uniting.
Mm-hmm.
And we're at that halfway point already.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Time for a commercial break. You're watching Out of My Mouth on the New Thought Media Network, and we'll be back in just a minute.
Don't go away.
Don't go away.
Don't go away.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Om Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.
And we're back.
Well, hello.
Oh my goodness.
Hello.
Ogun.
Hi.
Three white women trying to fill your shoes on decolonizing New Thought.
My sincere apologies. I missed all your messages and links and things. I only just saw them. So here I
Okay.
am. I'm so
We're
sorry.
glad you're here.
We're happy to have you. I was just going to share with our listeners that you, in your sharing of the article you wrote for Science of Mind, you really invited all of us to take a long, hard, uncomfortable look at decolonizing ourselves and our own teachings.
Yes.
Would you
Did
like
you say a comfortable? Did you say a comfortable look or an uncomfortable look?
uncomfortable? We need to do the hard, uncomfortable work of decolonizing ourselves and our own teachings.
Yes. Yes. So I think the first part is understanding what we mean by that term decolonizing. And
Thank
the
you.
term has both a literal and a metaphorical meaning. So the literal meaning is to look at all the ways colonization and all the things associated with colonization have made an impact. And the first literal idea is literally get rid of the colonizers and return the land back to whatever indigenous peoples that the land was stolen from.
Right.
So that's our first layer of decolonizing. But then we know that the elements of colonization are deep and far-reaching as well. And one of the and colonization has imposed itself a lot of different ways. Everything that's connected to a system of oppression, and I like to use bell hooks's categories of the systems of oppression: patriarchy, white supremacy, capitalism. So all the ways that those three things show up in how we live, move, and have our being, and they do in everything, in every person, in every place, because it's the system and the culture we're born into. We don't have to actively go out and learn these things. We just pick them up by osmosis almost. We learn them from our parents. We learn them from what we watch on TV, the music we listen, everything at our job. We see the impacts of it. And those of us who might be marginalized or minoritized and the recipients of the harm done by colonization, we also internalize a lot of those traits as well for ourselves. So the idea of decolonizing is looking to see where all these systems of oppression and all the manifestations of them and all the different ways that they show up are woven into how we, again, live, move, have our being, how we speak, how we talk, how we teach, how we practice our spirituality. And then we get rid of them, we transform them, we come up with new ways of being, we address them. So the very first step is acknowledge that they even may be there. And we don't want to do this because a lot of time, especially when it comes to religious and spiritual context, we assume that the founders, the originators of what we're thinking about or talking about were basically infallible. So let's start with the Bible. Even though we are in the New Thought tradition and we don't take the Bible literally, right? Is there anyone that would dare look at anything that Jesus has reportedly said and taught and go like, there might be some issues with that, right? Because then we have to assume, so these systems of oppression weren't named then what they are now, but sexism existed, right? He lived at a time where women were thought of as basically property, like chattel and animals. And at no point do I remember Jesus coming out and saying, hey, you know what? Women are just as equal to men, are just as equivalent in, as human beings. He didn't come out and say that. Now, we can, what's the word I want? Look at instances he had in his interactions with women as written in the Bible and go like, well, clearly he demonstrated that women are equal because he made space for them. And if that's the case, why were there no women in his inside circle of 12 disciples? Or were they? And we just don't know about it because of the writings later of who wrote the Gospels, right?
Exactly.
So the idea of decolonizing is kind of with an open mind, an open heart, doing some inquiry and being open to, being open to things not being infallible or requiring change. When we look at our teachings, we we in Unity pretty much hold whatever the Fillmores wrote as sacrosanct. And no one, as far as I know, objectively critiques or questions what the Fillmores wrote as the founders of Unity. And I would propose that, again, the Fillmores were a white couple living in Missouri in the late 1800s, to assume that they were absolutely divorced from any of the cultural contexts that would have been internalized is a reach. Okay. Yeah. And so to look at perhaps even how their teachings are taught now and applied now to take things into consideration. So I remember that article, I think I used the example of when we do our prosperity teachings. And we think of abundance teachings as this like universal principle that we can just all equally apply in our lives. And while on one hand that's true, on the other hand, because of, in our 5th century world, real proven systemic obstacles to financial abundance in our world, certain people are going to have a harder time manifesting and gaining these benchmarks than other groups will. We still have women. There's a gender pay gap. Women still on average make a lot less than men. And it would be interesting to see if that applies for both the women and the men that are holding the same job positions, and they both happen to be, New Thought students, right? So to factor in those things. So when we teach these principles, it behooves us to go, so these are some systemic obstacles in place. So depending on your gender, on your ability, on your ethnicity, on your race, you may realize that in applying these principles and walking in the real world, you may not manifest quite what some other people might manifest, because structures are designed to favor some over others. And when we don't do this, then we have students who are in these classes going like, I must be doing this wrong. Something's wrong with me and my consciousness, because I'm not getting the same results as another person. You might not be getting them, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with this capitalistic systems that are set up. So that's something we need to, I think, factor in to our teaching in our classes. So decolonizing doesn't mean that necessarily mean the teaching was wrong, or that we can't teach a principle, but realize that when we teach a principle, the application and the results from living that principle may not show up equally for everyone, because they have to be applied and practiced in the real world. And the real world is not designed to provide the same equal, smooth path for everyone for a lot of reasons.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
You're talking about prosperity, and I certainly get what you're saying. The logistical information. However, if we use prosperity as an example, in my head, and how I can wrap my head around prosperity, it isn't about financial gain. It's I look at what prosperity is. And hear me too, that I do understand exactly what you're saying about the logistics. Not everybody is sitting in the same chair.
Right.
However, there's prosperity also in the mindset.
Oh yeah. So there's prosperity / abundance as absolute principles, and there is prosperity abundance as those principles manifest in our lives. So I'm not necessarily talking about the mindset or the absolute idea of the principle, right? I'm talking about the real world demonstration and manifestation. Okay, because sure, if we have an abundance mindset, a prosperity mindset, but we are not manifesting that in our five sensory world, then it's just as well as we didn't have the mindset, because part of it is around our lives, right? We change it, and that the same, change your thoughts, change your life, right? So part of the point is about creating our lives to reflect our consciousness,
which is not always about outer circumstances, but how we react to them. Right?
There's that too. Yeah,
right.
there's a piece of that. That's a part of it as well. And how we react to it also, because I think sometimes we have this sense that our spiritual teachings just automatically override our internalized biases and unconscious thoughts. And they don't.
They don't.
So yes, let's absolutely teach, learn, and live our spiritual principles. But then let's also teach and learn about how to transform our unconscious biases.
Right.
Because, and this is why, for example, you will have, and I don't know if I mentioned this in this article or another one I wrote, you will have some of the seemingly most spiritual, enlightened gurus who still commit heinous acts of sexual abuse, right? Because they have a spiritual consciousness, so to speak. They know things, and I'm sure they've said things that have transformed countless of lives. But until they have done the work to decolonize themselves of internalized patriarchy that on some level says, especially for heterosexual men gurus, that women are there for sexual conquest, then they abuse their power. Right? So that's another example of again, we've got these conscious teachings, we've got these spiritual principles. They can be universally applied, but they don't automatically just override the unconscious biases and the thoughts that we have. So I feel on some level we've got to either bring that to folks' attention, teach them side by side, or acknowledge that our teachings, whether because of the time they were written, who wrote them, that they weren't even acknowledged, and they need to be acknowledged.
Absolutely. And we started the conversation with, we don't know what we don't know, right? And so it's also our responsibility to be curious and open to what we don't know.
Exactly.
And so I'm looking at the time, Ogun, and I know that you and Reverend Kelly Isolo have a group called Sanctus.
It's called Project Sanctus.
Sanctus.
So,
and
yes.
Tell us a little bit, because I also know that from what I heard from Kelly, you have two separate groups, one for white people that meet and one for Black people that meet. And I don't know if you bring them back together. And what is the thinking behind that in helping us understand and learn?
So Project Sanctus is the name of the platform as a whole, and we have multiple offerings. We do a podcast, we do workshops. Like this very Saturday, we have a workshop coming up around teaching some embodied practices to help some of us de-stress a little bit from the election results, because we carry all our trauma in our bodies. So even if we do the mental, spiritual work of forgiveness, that doesn't again automatically take care of what we're holding in our bodies. So these embodied practices are geared towards that. So we that's an offering. We have our own podcast called With Love and Justice for All. And we record almost every week, and we talk about these issues around social and racial justice. And we also address some of the issues that come up in spiritual communities around racial and social justice. Because as you know, in Unity, we're very invested in comfort and not creating tension and discord.
I don't know so much, not from the last 5 years.
You'd be surprised how much that's still happening in communities. And how ministers will say, we have people who, who are both Republicans and Democrats in our congregation, so we can't speak specifically to one or the other, that sort of thing. But what you're referring to is twice a month, we have an affinity group discussion. And it's the first and the third Wednesday. In fact, there's one happening tonight. We're recording on Wednesday. First and third Wednesdays of the month, 7:30 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. The first Wednesday, and what happens in the affinity group is that sometimes we bring specific issues to talk about. Other times we talk about current events happening in the world, or we just open it up for folks to bring in issues that they want to talk about. So once a month, we all are in discussion together on the first Wednesday. And the third Wednesday, we divide racially. So Kelly, who is a white woman, she takes all the white folk, and I take all the BIPOC folk, anyone who's not white, basically. And part of the reason is that because of our internalized racism and all the culturally internalized things around race, when we are mixed in a mixed group versus a separate group, there's a different energy. People talk differently. People show up differently. When we're in a mixed group, especially now, white folk, for example, they are afraid of saying the wrong thing or putting their foot in their mouths or offending and causing harm. So there's definitely sometimes a holding back or over censoring of themselves. Black folk are afraid of sometimes, like, just showing up as themselves, in their true selves. Sort of sometimes for the same reason. Unity folks, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings, or sometimes they just don't feel safe with the presence of white bodies in the discussion group. And you're probably thinking to yourself, how could they not feel safe? We are unity folk. Like we don't even want to hurt a caterpillar or a butterfly or we're the folks who will see a spider and we're going to pick it up with some paper and a glass, and we are not here about causing harm. But that's got nothing to do with it, because of the lived experience of Black and brown folk. The presence of a white body changes the dynamic, and they don't always feel comfortable. And to be clear, the presence of Black and brown folk, specifically in Unity and New Thought churches, who have been harmed, whether it's been through microaggressions or macroaggressions, they have a lived experience of their spiritual community not always being a safe space for them.
Yes.
So I can tell you as a witness to the conversations that happens both times, it's different. Some people show up, a term you might hear or might have heard in Black communities, code switching. Sometimes Black folks show up in spaces, and depending on if there's white bodies in the space, they talk differently, they move differently, they act differently. And this is a learned self-preservation technique from generations of, if you are noticed too much, you will be harmed. Right? So that's the reason we do it. There's work for us to do, to learn from each other. And that's the other thing. There's always also this idea of, we the Black and brown folks, we got to teach y'all white folk, how to be. So there's this unconscious, put in more labor on us when we just want to show up and be ourselves. Right. And so just as, so sometimes we have the work to do separately. White folk got to hold each other accountable, get their own people, as I say. And it's no different than, when we have groups around patriarchy, we need men to have sometimes their own space to hold each other accountable and say things that they only will feel comfortable saying around other men, so that the other men can hold them accountable as well. And I know that for a lot of churches and especially in the New Thought spaces, it's like, we can't have separate groups. That's divisive. And I always remind people, you know what? Listen, you didn't have a problem when it was a women's group or a men's group. You didn't have a problem with an LGBTQ group, right? You didn't have a problem when it was 65 and older group. We have separate groups all the time. But why is it an issue around race?
Yeah.
right? Because we still haven't gotten comfortable,
Right.
wholly comfortable talking about race.
And that makes
And
total
then,
sense.
and race has been politicized so much
Yeah.
that to have discussions around race has become a discussion around politics.
Mm.
And we don't want to talk about politics in church. And I think we need to
Mhm.
do more talking about politics in church
I
Yeah.
think
for
so
this
too.
very, very reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now I hate to interrupt this. We're down to our last 4 minutes.
And again, my apologies for missing your
Well,
your
you'll just
messages.
have to
We
next
got to
year.
bring you back.
Yes, I will come back, and I'll be on.
This is a really important conversation. Really
Yes.
important conversation. So we only have a couple of minutes left. So I want to give it to you, Ogun, to sort of give us just sort of, I don't know, bullet point of what you think the most important thing for people to know about the idea of decolonizing New Thought or decolonization, period. What would be the most important thing we need to understand?
That being spiritual does not automatically make you a person who doesn't cause harm to others.
Mm.
Right.
And do your spiritual practices, but you need a whole separate set of practices for that decolonization work.
Right.
And
We need to uncover our bias, because we all have it.
Exactly. We all have internalized racial bias, patriarchal bias, capitalistic bias. We all have these unconscious internalized biases, and they're unconscious. So we don't even know that we have them, but we still act from them. And just being spiritual is not going to automatically bring them to your attention. You have to do specific, separate work for that. So that's what I always need people to understand. And don't assume that you don't. The question isn't if I perpetuate these systems of oppression, but how do I?
Right.
And then take a look at them. And Project Sanctus isn't the only space that there are so many spaces and resources out there. What makes, I think, us especially suited for spiritual folks is that, I mean, we are New Thought ministers. We bring we approach this through a spiritual lens. In fact, we say this is spiritual work.
Yes.
You know, so
Absolutely.
that's
the most spiritual work we'll ever do is
sorry, go ahead.
is doing our own research and learning what we can learn so that we can better practice. And one of the things I've tried to do is when I've stepped in it and somebody lets me know that I've done harm or said something that was inappropriate, just to say thank you for letting me know, and then going on and continuing to get my work so that I'm not defending myself because, you know, obviously white person, I don't know, but when somebody's willing to stand up and say to me, you know, that was inappropriate, to sit back and say, thank you, you're right.
Which is an awesome improvement, because it wasn't so long ago that the New Thought reply would have been, this is about them, this is not about me. And they're seeing their own reflection, and this is why they're upset. This is not mine. It's not right. Am I wrong? I'm not wrong. Exactly.
You're absolutely right. Or
So,
what's in your consciousness?
that one.
That's ugly. That one is so ugly, but
Right.
I've heard it many times. Yeah.
And it's still being said in a lot of places.
It really is.
To be clear.
Yeah. We need to have you on my other show as well, because you got a lot to share and there's so much. I want to hear you talk more about this because it's so incredible. Such great work. We're down to the end. Mark, do you have a quick word, or Cheryl, a quick word you want to throw in?
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for this important work that you and Kelly are doing. Thank you for being your authentic self, and really for leading a way in helping us just be able to think about what we don't know and the work that we need to do.
Mark?
You're welcome.
I'll just say uncovering what I don't know and what I don't want to admit that was there.
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, I love you all. We're at the end. You're watching Out of My Mouth on the New Thought Media Network, and we'll be back again next week with more interesting conversations. And Ogun, we can't wait to have you back. Be sure to like,
Thank
share,
you.
and subscribe. Bye,
Bye for
everybody.
now.